I didn't find out what my identity was until later. Like I knew, but I couldn't put a name to it until I found like people and I understood that there were other people out there like me. I got more out of my teachers than my peers, I think, and even my own parents. Like,
So what did post-cancer life look like for you?
it was chaotic.
What do you want to say to people who are quietly surviving?
There are other people out there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breaking Rank, the podcast where we lead without permission. I'm your host, Diana Lortzen, and today's guest is someone whose leadership story doesn't just challenge the mold, it shatters it. Laura Gutierrez has spent 20 years building the digital backbone for marketing teams, designing communication systems, interpreting data, and turning slow, painful processes into elegant workflows. She's a writer, a technologist, and someone who learned early that when you don't fit the mold, you don't wait for permission, you lead by example. She's a queer Latina, a breast cancer survivor, a solo parent, and a rule breaker with intention. Laura doesn't manage people into leadership. She shows them what's possible, and then she writes the playbook so you can do it too. Laura, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Diana.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to tell your story, and I'm really excited to bring it to the audience of Breaking Rank. Your bio captures your skill set, but it definitely does not cover the depth of your story. So I want to dig into the whole human journey behind those lines, and I want to be able to honor your story today. So thank you for trusting me with that.
Well, I'm in good company, so.
Well, thank you. So I want to dig in. When I first asked you to be on this podcast, you made a comment to me and you said, I don't really feel like a leader. Why would you, what does that mean to you? What does leadership mean to you?
I don't have the title. I don't necessarily in the right locations. I don't fit the traditional mold of what you think a leader should be, particularly, I think, in um, the legal industry. So we've got a mutual friend, and I remember when I started out almost, oh Lord, 20 years ago, we met at an LMA conference, and I think we both recognized in each other a very similar person, and yet I knew she was going to go on to CMO, which she just made, and I was never going to be that. I wanted to be on smaller teams and smaller firms, and I don't know, I think that threw people off a little bit. And yet I love being in the mix and yeah, leading by example, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to that whole CMO concept in just a moment, and also the leadership aspect of this, because we both know that titles don't make leaders. We've probably both experienced many leaders who were either our bosses or who had the title and are not what any of us would consider actually a leader, but rather a person who manages projects or maybe even people, but doesn't necessarily make them a leader. So I want to talk a little bit about who you were before leadership entered the picture. What parts of your childhood shaped the woman you eventually became?
I led quite a bit. I went to a very small school, and in some ways that allowed me to sort of do a lot of things through school, academics, extracurriculars, and I think I also threw myself into that because the rest of it was horrible. But you know, I loved taking charge and doing things, and I'm a project planner, and I like organization, and I have a lot of ideas, so I'm constantly in the mix and in the fray, and I just, I spoke up, and I had examples, and I knew what I was talking about. So I think, that those qualities started very early for me.
Mhm. And we've talked a little bit about your childhood, but there are a few things that I wanted to explore a bit more about your childhood because you were someone who grew up brown in a community that didn't really reflect you. And on top of that, you are a white passing Latina. So I want to know, what was that like for you? What did that whole passing concept mean for you?
Well, I mean, I didn't pass for the first, 25 years of my life. And I'm 40 now. The older you get and the more time you spend inside, brown people do become whiter. And I think that's hard for white people to accept. And it's also hard for, now, most of my family's Mexican. My dad is. You will never not know he's Mexican. And yet, his family made a conscious choice to what they call assimilate. So they didn't explore or share or celebrate their culture. They did not want to teach their children Spanish. So my grandfather did not speak English, and my dad says he doesn't know Spanish. And yet, how do they communicate? It just, but he won't speak it. He never wanted to teach me, and yet my white mother was the one who pushed me to learn Spanish, which you don't get early in a white rural Minnesota school. So Mexicans don't really want to claim you because you don't have the culture. And white people don't let you claim being Mexican because you're not that color anymore. So it's a weird place to sit in the middle. And it was like that in high school where I literally had the darkest skin in that school for 99% of my K through 12 career in that literally one room school, like one hallway. That's what we had. Um, and it was, I mean, even I don't know how to explain it because I didn't view myself as a brown person or a person of color, or I struggled with my identity in that sense. And yet I knew I wasn't white. And yet I didn't have people surrounding me to explore the culture. My grandparents lived in Michigan. We saw them once or twice a year, and I was young, and by the time you get to an age where you realize how much that means to you, they were gone. My grandfather was born in 1900.
Wow.
The year 1900. Yeah, crazy. Um it was a very rough upbringing. It's a hard time to be a kid.
Did you feel like you had to mute or hide certain parts of yourself when you were growing up, then having that kind of, I don't want to call it a crisis or a crises, but like, did you feel that you couldn't bring your full self kind of to the table when you were in school because you were going through confusion about your identity, or how did that shape you?
I mean, I didn't mind standing up for certain things. Certain things I knew were right. Like we have a big Mexican population in the town next door. And people would start saying things and I would defend that. And I knew what that it was very easy to see what was right in that situation. But I did mask. I found out later post cancer that I am autistic, and there were certain I don't know no like necessarily how to act in front of people. So I do have to take cues from other people. And I did have to learn how to cull and suppress certain things about myself. But it was never like I was never just among the people. I can't mask enough to do that. And I was in situations where I would never want to do that anyway. Just the things that people say and are just inherently wrong to me. And you were just never going to get me to stop.
Hmm. And that kind of masking becomes training, even if we don't recognize it at the time. And
Yes,
so
I
it can
didn't
be
know I was
very,
doing it.
yeah, it can just become ingrained into your everyday habits and behavior. So I'm curious, from that experience in your childhood, what did you learn from that in terms of leadership habits? What was born out of that?
I don't know necessarily about leadership habits. I think I learned to empathize with people,
Hmm.
um, and have, that. empathy and putting myself in other people's shoes and learning to come to people and just like seeing through what people normally see into the nooks and
Mm-hmm.
crannies and finding the people that finding people that fit you. Like I just felt very driven.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't explain it. It was just a pull, and I just knew things, and I knew to follow things regardless of whether or not anyone else was with me. And that instinct has carried me into adulthood, I think, and it's made more sense now why I did that then, but I don't think I understood it then. But
Mm-hmm.
the people I loved were my teachers. I got more out of my teachers than my peers, I think, and even my own parents. Like, my home life wasn't great either, so I struggled. I didn't find out what my identity was until later. Like I knew, but I couldn't put a name to it until I found like people and I understood that there were other people out there like me. I literally just thought I was one in this town of 200. Like I just didn't, a lot of me felt wrong for a long time.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you mentioned that it created a drive in you and that there was this pull that you couldn't quite identify. And I feel like a lot of people who have experienced less than ideal upbringings sometimes have that sense of, I want to get out of this. I don't belong here. I know I'm destined for something else, and I don't know exactly what that is. And so you kind of try to move forward directionless in a way, but you know that you belong somewhere, but not where you are. Is that somewhat how you felt?
Yeah. I think I felt, I mean, I write, like writing is my calling. And I knew that from the moment I started writing. Like I knew I had stories to tell, but I didn't know what they were. And that was a way for me. I think that kept me grounded and sane because that was something not necessarily out of the ordinary. I think sometimes the way that I write or the things that I write about are part of it. And I learned to exercise that and it's become a vehicle for me. Um, but yeah, I knew there was just something, there was a
Hmm.
greater purpose for what was happening. And not in the like, oh, everything, ugh. I can't, but I do think there's some that you get to turn it into something, that there's something, yeah, you just know there's something going on.
Yeah. And it's your story. I mean, there's so much that we could dig into in your story, and we wouldn't have enough time on a single podcast, to be honest. But I know that your childhood definitely shaped who you became, but there was so much that happened after that. I mean, I feel like you've lived a few different lives in your one life.
Yeah, there was a stage 4 cancer patient who, like, they feel sorry for me when I told my cancer story. It's sort of surreal sometimes. And then you become this survivor label, and there's a lot of pressure in maintaining whatever positive attitude you have. But like, I mean, most of this I don't get to control.
Hmm.
It happens to you. All you can do is learn from it and
Hmm.
take the good parts and leave the bad, and move on as much as you can.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your cancer diagnosis. That had a profound impact on your life. And so tell me about that. What was that like when you, first of all, how did you even know to get checked for cancer?
Well, I mean, I felt it. Like I was, let's see, my youngest was 5, so I was 5 years from pregnancy and breastfeeding, and I found a lump and it got bigger. And then I had discharge, which is not normal. You like, again, wasn't breastfeeding. And that's when I knew to go into my doctor, and this thing grew quite fast. So I went to my primary care provider. Um, and we did an ultrasound and a mammogram, and they didn't show anything, which is actually typical for women under 40. I was 36 at the time. Um, and my my general practitioner knew enough to get a breast MRI, and that's what showed cancer. And by the time everything was said and done and all the testing was completed, I was stage 3 breast cancer. So it had grown to 8 centimeters in about 6 to 8 months.
And you were already carrying a lot in your personal life, and then your body began its own battle.
Yeah. Yep. Ended up married to an abusive man. A lot of gaslighting, I guess you could, there was no punching necessarily, which is interesting. It's a lot of my life is some, form of gaslighting, whether it was by my own parents or the kids at school or, then I ended up living with it. And, then I got cancer. And that's what did it. That's what got us the divorce. But
What did the gaslighting look like for you from friends, from your boss, from your partner?
I mean, it's a lot of the blame. I think it perpetuated the myth that I was the person in the wrong and I was bad. And, it's a very hard life to live, to think that you're hurting people. Or I understand fully how I can come across, and particularly now knowing I have autism and how blunt I can be. And then, being a blunt woman on top of that, it's, I get the reputation, but also a lot of these situations, people don't want to look at themselves, and I'm the one who gets all the blame. And that's what it was. Whether it was my kid falling down the stairs when she was learning how to fall down the stairs, that was my fault. Or, why I just wasn't assimilating, able to come back from whatever it was. I
You
don't know.
felt
I
like
think
they were blaming you for your cancer?
not, I mean, so this is the delicate situation because it's easy to pinpoint who it was. But like, I think I can explain it like this, like particularly post cancer, because I had this really great attitude going through treatment. And by the end of treatment, and people think of treatment as chemo, surgery, and radiation, which is what I had. But once you're deemed cancer free, it's like, okay, you're back to normal. Great. Everything's fine. And that's not what survivorship is. And I am also not one of those lucky people who just gets to move on from cancer. Cancer is never, I don't have it right now, but my body and the way I am medically is different because of cancer. I have to live that every day. I live with pain and memory issues and all these other things, right? And when I came, so radiation's done. In the 2 months between radiation ending, my now ex is telling me he's moving out of the house. My best friend stops talking to me, and I'm on these drugs that literally make me want to commit suicide. Like, they're hormonal drugs. I don't do well on hormones, and I didn't know it. And my doctors are pressuring me. I'm literally being treated for as if I have 2 different types of cancer. And and people have all these expectations of who I am and what I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to acting like. And yet nobody actually knows what it's like, where my headspace was. It was crazy. I went from, 2 incomes to having my children 95% of the time at that point. I'm going bankrupt. Like, it's crazy what I went through in like those 6 to 1 year after treatment.
And what was it like working during cancer treatment?
I mean, during cancer treatment, it was a thing that kept me distracted. Post-cancer treatment, it was a struggle because I think people had very specific expectations.
So what did post-cancer life look like for you?
It was chaotic. It was very chaotic. And not the things that were happening were chaotic in a bad way. And when I tried to change things for chaotic in a good way, people were like, oh, you can't change. Too much is changing. You can't change anything else. And yet sometimes you need change in order to kickstart things. And I think I let a lot of people's opinions dictate my choices at the time, which was not a good idea. People just literally, I don't think, can comprehend what having cancer is like, what having cancer is like, going through a divorce or any of it. Like, it's just not what you think it is.
You just had so many things happening at one time in your life. I mean, I think that would be a lot for anyone to deal with. Just dealing with cancer and the treatment, and then a divorce, and being diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and then having all of the other side effects of your treatment that you now have to live with, and trying to explain that to people and make them understand where you're coming from. That must have been just insane.
Well, that's more recent. I didn't even have those things to understand myself going
Hmm.
through all that. That's like in the last year that I've discovered that. And now it all makes a lot of sense to me, but I was on basic overload. Like, there's this TikTok video. But it's somebody with a glass of water, and it's like people keep pouring, and there's nothing that you're just overflowing with all this stuff. And I think particularly with cancer, I don't know. It's people have all of these ideas of what you do. And then again, the cancer-free label sort of puts you in a different space. And yet again, sometimes I don't want to jinx myself, but like, it was easier facing death and the peace that you had with that than facing suffering every day. Because it is, in some ways, it's a suffering, not sometimes physically, sometimes mentally, but like, so much has changed, and not just the things around you, but the way that your body functions. This was so much like being pregnant. And if you've ever been pregnant, and the way that your body changes and you just have to fucking deal with it, it's sort of a surreal, like, absurd, life altering thing. And cancer was a lot like that. It puts you in these positions where you just have to fucking give up and deal with it and figure out some method to cope with it.
You know, it's interesting because when I met you, I would never have guessed that you had gone through all of those things. I just met you and thought you were brilliant, that you were amazing with technology. You seemed really cheerful. And, sometimes we put masks on and present ourselves in one way. And on the inside, we're going through a completely, destructive and chaotic time in our lives. And I had no clue that you were going through any of this. You didn't let it show at all.
I mean, it kind of depends on the context. Sometimes I feel like I don't hide it, because I let it out in some places, which is, I think, what gets me in trouble. But like, the happiness isn't a ploy. It's not a mask. I can't fake it, if that makes sense. I like people. I enjoy people. Other people make me light up. Like, I get energy from other people, and I love and enjoy that. And I think I can both have feelings that have negative connotations, or like, and still yet have this happiness. It's not always easy to find, but like, I don't know. For me, it's other people, and particularly other people that, I don't know, understand that, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah. And you've mentioned a few times about getting in trouble with people. You brought that up to me before. What does it mean to get in trouble? And who are you getting in trouble with?
Well, I guess it depends. I think my emotions get me in trouble a lot. I emote a lot, and people don't understand the way that I understand emotions, so they come across differently. And then sometimes I become helpless to change people's opinion and perspective on me, and that's like, I can't get out of that. I can't talk my way out of that. It's I don't know, the way that people interpret me is hard. I've come to realize. Sometimes I just, at this stage of my life, and between the things that happen to me, like, I just can't help being myself. And like, between the way that I dress, or I act, how loud my laugh is, the way that I choose to talk, the things that I choose to write about, um, often get me in hot water. Again, particularly in the legal industry. I've had bosses talk to me about blog posts, my personal blog posts on multiple occasions.
Such as, what about your blog posts?
Well, one of them was the blog post I wrote about not wanting to be a CMO. It got brought up at a job interview of sorts. That was awkward. And then I was coached to write about more positive things, like 10 business lessons from chemo, which is an absurd concept to me. But I mean, I could write that; it would be all sarcastic. But again, I think it's just the delusion that people have of like, okay, you're done with cancer, go run a marathon. Like we used to joke, cancer patients. That's literally sometimes all the stories you read would be these women who like go through cancer and great, they're cancer free and now they run a marathon. Well, my bones would break. So most of us are not even in a space where we can do that. So again, the expectation of like, well, you beat cancer, you could do anything. It's luck, man. I don't know. Yeah, it's the way people find so much inspiration that you feel like you have to be that type of inspiration when that's,
You feel like you have to perform,
or not say anything. Yeah.
but be the version that they want you to be, what they think a cancer survivor should look like and should act like. Is that what you experienced?
Oh, yes. Very much. When I've already had to mask most of my life. So it wasn't a good place.
And it's interesting because your body became part of your leadership story. I think because, and we've had conversations about this before, you had a double mastectomy.
Yes.
You mentioned before that you felt like you didn't fully belong in the spaces that you were in. And so identity was something that, you had struggled with for a long time, both with, your identity as a cancer patient and then a cancer survivor, your identity being brown and white passing and assimilating and growing up in a small town where you didn't really feel like you belonged. So, when it comes to identity, how do you identify now?
Just generally with everything.
Yeah. Who is Laura?
Well, I mean, labels are interesting, right? I do feel very connected to the Mexican culture. My dad was first generation. I do not speak Spanish, but I understand a lot of, I think, Mexican people, the Mexican culture, sort of it's not the same. I can definitely tell a lot of my upbringing is shaped by somebody who is not from America. And yet struggles, it is very interesting about, I think sometimes people who migrate to America specifically, and Mexico is one of them, where, they want to assimilate to the Mexican culture. I think I didn't really realize, I always said I wasn't straight. I knew that early on. I don't think we had the terms that we have now. I identify as pansexual, which is, I don't care about gender. I also knew I was a woman and I wore that label for a long time, but I didn't fit it. I didn't wear the things or dress the same way. Back in the day, they called it a tomboy. And so when I had my double mastectomy, I think I felt very much like that it sort of explains my gender in a more physical way, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I think I wear a lot of different labels.
How has your queerness shaped your experience in professional settings?
I mean, it's interesting being in a very traditional industry where I do get along more with men. And so early on in my career, I think people thought I was sleeping with everybody.
Mm.
So that was an interesting, and they, thing to be accused of, and I was completely unaware that that was the vibe. Yeah, that was a weird place to be. But I do think I ended up at a firm that was very like pro queer, very very pro queer, and people were out and loud and proud, and there were a lot of them. And I think finding the culture there very accepting made me realize where I fit among the spectrum. So I don't think my queerness has come up as much later in my career. But earlier on, I think it was just people, it like wasn't on anybody's radar and nobody talked about it. And
So with all of these things that we've discussed already, what was happening in your professional life? So like for example, you're going through all of these things and yet you still are working, you still got to pay the bills. How was all of this affecting the way that you showed up in the workplace?
I think sometimes, I mean, it made it hard. I think because a lot of the skills that I use at work are things that I am passionate about. They're writing, it's technology. So, I like the work, and I spent, the places I stayed the longest were with bosses that I really admired and who admired me. We had a very good reciprocal relationship, and um I could tolerate it. It was sort of a distraction. I like doing these things. I spend my personal time doing them in a way. Um so it wasn't so hard, but I think it came out under stress, and it's harder to tolerate things, so emotions I think were different, and people didn't necessarily understand my reaction, or yeah, the way I responded to certain things.
Yeah, you worked in the legal marketing, legal communications, legal technology space for years, and then you didn't for a while. What was that shift about? How did that come to pass?
I couldn't conform. It was, after cancer, and I just couldn't. I saw the writing on the wall. I was just never going to be the person they wanted me to be, and I just knew it then more than ever, and I wasn't gonna spend another day suffering. I mean, it was a different kind of suffering, and I loved what I did, and I loved the people there, and it just wasn't. I don't think it was good for any of us at that point, and it.
So you made the choice to move on, and where did you go from there?
I quit without a job lined up.
That's scary.
It was fucking scary.
I've done that before, and I know how terrifying that is.
Well, I think in some ways, knowing I was headed towards bankruptcy anyways, I mean, cancer care was 500,000,
Wow.
easily. I mean, I went to Mayo, so great for
Hmm.
that, but like, and that's not even counting the ongoing care I've had in the, 3 years since. Um, I basically cashed my 401k, and that's what I lived off of. My kids and I lived off of that. Um, and it was freeing in some ways and really scary and terrifying in others. But, if my thought was, I was in that space where like it was literally killing me. Like if I didn't, you know, those types of situations, I don't feel good about them. Yeah, I wasn't going to last much longer. It just puts you in a space where like, it's just not fun, and I wasn't going to be there again. Um, so I took the risk.
Yeah, that is not only scary, but it's incredibly brave and courageous because not knowing and having kids at the same time that you are supporting without knowing when your next paycheck is going to come in, that's a lot to take on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like confident enough in my skills just because I've been honing them since I can remember, but it's different selling yourself or like making up that type of income, and then doing it in a situation where you think your ex might use it against you was, um I don't know, but again, instinctually, I mean, clearly that is not a decision you make. I mean, in a way, I made it on a whim, and in a lot of ways, I didn't. Like,
Hmm.
it was necessary.
You needed it for your sanity.
Yeah, it was just not a space I could live in anymore. And again,
Yeah.
I battled, can't like, I'd been through all this stuff. It just seems unfair to then have to suffer for what? Like, what am I? Who am I suffering for? What is this all? What am I getting out of this? Like, you know, you kind of have to turn selfish.
I mean, and that's what redefining leadership really looks like, is choosing alignment. You're choosing, alignment over expectation, because people expected you to want to be a CMO, and they expected you to be on that ladder, that corporate ladder, and be successful in that way. Whereas you made a decision that was completely in the opposite direction, which was, I'm going to leave this place, this job that I'm comfortable with, and I'm going to choose a completely different path. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I know that it feels right. And you made that choice as a parent and as a survivor of all of that trauma. It's incredibly inspiring. And it just shows how courageous you are as a person. You're making moves that, many people would have chosen to stay in a place that was not accepting of where they were in their lives at that point, that no longer aligned with what was good for them, and would have stayed in that place. And you chose to take a different path. And that, my friend, is being a leader and being courageous. And I'm incredibly proud of you. And I'm so grateful to know you, because your background has not only inspired people, but it's giving you empathy, and it has made you just an incredible human being. I think you are able to, you can list off all of these diagnoses and all of these things that have happened in your life, and yet you're still an incredible friend, you're still an incredible person, and you're brilliant. I mean, literally anyone in the legal industry who has worked with you or knows that you're brilliant when it comes to writing and technology and anything Marcom in particular. You are somebody who anyone would want on their team.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know about everybody. I mean, right? Like, there's always going to be people that just don't. Especially those of us with a bigger personality. It's
Oh yeah, you're not always
you.
everyone's cup of tea. I mean,
Yeah,
and you won't be. So there's no point of even trying to be that for everyone. Trying to be everything to everyone and not being true to yourself is a hard lesson, and one that I've had to learn on my journey.
I think people say that and they're willing to use the words, and in some ways they mean it, and in some ways they don't. There's always a line, which of course I may like to push sometimes, but my story was never about a career. It
Hmm.
was because I didn't have people to look up to or to talk to, or like I didn't have other people to set the example. I just blindly followed, not really understanding or knowing what was out there. And eventually I found it. I think I got lucky, but I tell my story for those people
Hmm.
because they're suffering in some sort of way, or in silence, or they can't speak and people don't know. And that's a fucked up place to be when you
Yeah.
think there's something wrong when there isn't something wrong. Shit, I don't know if I want to out my kids, but like, you know, my kids aren't telling their family because they understand how their family feels about their identity.
Mm.
But I have been so vocal since they were kids about all sorts of things, all sorts of diversities. And it's because of that they feel comfortable enough to be themselves, and then to be themselves to somebody, to me, to their
Mm-hmm.
friends. Like, it's, it's now having kids, you see it in real time. I don't know if
Yeah.
you necessarily get, like, necessarily see the fruits of your labor or the reasons why you do things, but I've seen a glimpse of it in my kids, I think.
Mm-hmm. You said something that was really powerful a minute ago, and that was that your story was never about your career. And so much of leadership, right, and the concept of leadership is tied to career success, and it's tied to a title, and it's tied to, well, why don't you want to be the CMO? Why don't you want to go the next level and the next level and the next level? How can you be content if work isn't involved or if climbing the ladder isn't involved? And what you just said was not only a reminder to me, but it's just so powerful because you're right. Your story is not about your career path. Your story is so much more. You have lived through so many things that would have broken people and would have made people want to give up. And yet here you are. And it's not about what do you do now? Where are you? I think with a lot of these stories, there's always an arc, right? And the arc is like, I grew up, this happened to me, I overcame the obstacles, and look at me now. I am the director of, you know, business development, or the chief marketing and business development officer, or I overcame all of these things because look where I'm at in my career right now. And we haven't even talked about what you do now. And I actually really don't want to be honest, because it just doesn't define you. When I think of you, I don't think of your career at all. I've always been curious what it would have been like to work with you, um, and just be around the Laura in that world. But like you said, your story is so much more powerful than what you do every day. You are an example to people, you're an inspiration, you're a motivator, and you're a cheerleader. I've
Well,
called
that's
you
the easy
my
part,
my
is cheering on good people.
I've called you my emotional support human before because you're always there. I mean, without fail. And I'm just so grateful to know you. Your story was just, I mean, it was really inspirational, but it also created a safe space for me to be able to share my story, for me to feel comfortable around you, and for me to really learn from you and take in some of those things, because I can be extremely career focused. And with you, it just, it's not about work. It's about, hey, how are you doing? How are you being a good human today? How are you contributing to society? And I think that's a much more powerful legacy, and it's a much more powerful platform than defining someone by what it is that they do.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I don't think I'm the only one to have these feelings, but I think what cancer made clear was that we view, particularly America, like, we
Mhm.
view careers and work in a very, I mean, it's not negative, it's detrimental almost. Like, we don't, the things that matter, the kids, the special moments, the helping people out, being a good community to each other, we miss out on. I mean, so my commute pre-pandemic was 2 hours in the morning, not even freaking joking, door to door, from
Wow.
my door, because I had to drop my kids off, then I had to drive to the it was 2 freaking hours on a good day. I'm in Minnesota. When it snows, you're screwed. So I was spending 3 hours commuting a day, and still squeezing in-person time at work. So when we went to pandemic, and then I got 3 hours of extra work time, trying to go back to that, it was never going to happen, because now people had my like, all of the standards were up here, and something was going to fall. And cancer seemed to be the thing that pushed me very fast over the edge. Um, that is unsustainable. The things people make you do, particularly as a woman
Hmm.
in a male dominated space, and then as a woman of color or somebody of diverse background in a white male dominated industry, the shit that you put up with, it's almost an abusive relationship in and of itself.
Hmm.
Who you're supposed to act, what you're supposed to wear, the heels, all of it.
Yeah, the legal industry in particular is very tough because it is a male dominated industry, but it's also an industry where there are different caste systems where you are either a lawyer or a non-lawyer, and you are treated accordingly based on what your perceived value is and what you're bringing in to the firm. And it almost seems like cancer was something that really made you reevaluate what was important to you in life and what you were willing to put up with, what you were willing to accept.
Yeah. I mean, your mental health impacts your physical health impacts your mental health, your space and environments impact all of it. Um, and there just isn't, there was literally a month where I thought I was going to die. There was a spot in my lungs that they were going to test, and I thought cancer had metastasized. And work doesn't matter. The things that I do don't matter. What matters is what my kids remember. It's what other people remember. It's right.
Hmm.
It's Maya Angelou, and it's the things that you made people feel, not what you said. Although, again, I
Yeah.
write, and I think that makes people feel. But like, my legacy isn't assimilating and masking myself into oblivion where I'm like everybody else. It just wasn't.
Hmm.
That's just never in the cards.
Yeah. What do you want to say to people who are quietly surviving?
There's somebody out there, whether or not you get to speak your truth or have a voice to do so, there are other people out there. And I think finding your community in whatever space that you're in at the time is really important. And
Hmm.
at least telling somebody, even if it's behind closed doors, telling somebody so that you can be neutral, or somebody can be neutral about what's happening, because I don't, it's very hard to see it sometimes when you're surrounded by people who don't understand.
And of course, I have to ask, what does breaking rank mean to you?
Oh, I love this. I love this name. Because I think people need to break out of molds and be different and be the person to be rebellious. Be the first person to do something, because that's what creates innovation and creativity, and it gives other people the license to also step through the door. I think it opens doors for people.
I love that. Love that so much. And you are definitely example of someone who broke rank. And I love you all the more for it.
Back at
So,
you.
is there anything that we didn't cover today that you think it's important to leave our audience with?
I think, curiosity. I think lead with curiosity instead of not saying the thing. Don't be afraid to be embarrassed. I mean, it's not embarrassing to be wrong. Just ask the question. Um, I think by being more curious about who people are, even if you don't get the right answer, you learn something. If it was the wrong thing to say, you learn something. People just want you to take the time to get it right. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on this podcast and for reminding us all what really matters in life and for breaking rank. And thank you, of course, for trusting me to tell your story. So I appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And to all of those who are listening, I hope that you all got some insight from Laura's story. If you want to learn more about Laura, you can find her on LinkedIn, and hopefully you will experience some of her fantastic writing skills as well. And for those of you who are new listeners, make sure that you listen to us on all of the different platforms where you listen to podcasts, and make sure to follow us on YouTube. So thank you so much, everyone, and until next time.